The wait is finally over for the Netflix live-action adaptation of One Piece, with all 8 episodes of Season 1 dropping on the 31st of August. It's no secret that Netflix hasn't had much success when it comes to anime adaptations. One Piece holds the title of the world's most popular manga series, and it's no wonder that fans were feeling apprehensive for how this adaptation would turn out. Even if you have a passing interest in anime, then it's very likely that you'll know the premise behind the story of Luffy wanting to become the king of the pirates. Despite Netflix having several anime titles on its streaming service, the majority of Western audiences prefer to watch live-action series. This means that a large portion of viewers will be unfamiliar with the anime or the manga versions of One Piece. So by adapting the work into a new medium, the hope is that it will appeal to a wider audience and will make more fans fall in love with the incredible world and characters of One Piece. So how well does this live-action version adapt the most pivotal moments of the East Blue Saga? Does it capture the heart of the original work and convey it effectively into this new medium, or does it fail and join the long list of bad live-action anime adaptations? Make sure you stick around until the end of the video, where I will be sharing my thoughts on the future of live-action One Piece as we discuss details about Season 2. So without further delay, here is my complete breakdown and analysis of the first 8 episodes of the 2023 Netflix One Piece adaptation. From a production standpoint, this series was negatively impacted from the very beginning, while the live-action adaptation was announced way back in 2017, and pre-production was initially set for May of 2020. Because of the pandemic, the schedule had constantly been pushed back, and consequently, casting hadn't even started yet. At the time, the producers had given the series the codename Project Roger, and during filming, it was called Project Panda. In terms of the scheduling of the production, things didn't get back onto their feet until February of 2022. The production crew was largely composed of the same people who had worked on the Netflix adaptation of Cowboy Bebop, but the difference was there were fewer producers, executive producers, and episode writers that were joining on to One Piece. Martin Adelstein had returned as the primary executive producer alongside cinematographer Nicole Hirsch. However, the latter did not receive a full team that was necessary to conduct action sequences until 6 weeks before the first scheduled shooting. Principal filming had taken place within Cape Town, South Africa, while additional scenes were shot in Spain and Mexico. Let's take a second to discuss the budget for this adaptation, which has been making headlines for being one of the most expensive shows ever created. It's been confirmed that each episode of One Piece had cost around $17.27 million, thus giving the first season a total budget of $140 million. To put things into perspective, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon were estimated to cost $15 million an episode, and Netflix's adaptation of Cowboy Bebop in comparison had a budget of $6 to $7 million an episode. So Netflix is banking on people logging in and watching One Piece 2023 in its entirety. I think that they are expecting it to reach the levels of viewership which rivals the likes of Stranger Things, which has an average budget of $30 million per episode. The writers for the One Piece live-action adaptation had the daunting task of adapting roughly 10 volumes of the manga into 8 one-hour episodes. The official trailer revealed to us several characters from the East Blue Saga, as we learn that the Straw Hats will be battling against the villain Arlong. So far, we know of at least 10 credited writers for the One Piece live-action series. However, it doesn't specify if there are any additional ghostwriters involved for refining dialogue or correcting inconsistencies. The series has taken an intriguing approach in terms of direction. Every set of 2 episodes will be overseen by a different director, with Steve Maeda, the executive director, having writing credits for the first and the 8th episode. On the casting front, there doesn't appear to be many renowned names, especially amongst the Straw Hat crew, aside from the actor playing Zoro, Makenyu Arata. Arata is the son of the famous Japanese martial artist and actor Sonny Chiba. Makenyu is no stranger to either acting or live-action anime adaptations. He has previously starred in the anime adaptation for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable as Nijimura Okuyasu, starring in Rurouni Kenshin The Final as Yukishiro Shinichi, as well as starring in the live-action Fullmetal Alchemist as Scar. With his wealth of experience in front of the camera, it seems like he is the best amongst the cast of the Straw Hats in terms of acting ability. From the beginning of the live-action series, we notice some noticeable changes as to how the story unfolds in comparison to the manga, but this is all to be expected from an adaptation. Live-action One Piece covers material from the Romance Dawn arc all the way up until the end of Arlong Park. The first episode adapts Romance Dawn, episode 2 adapts Orange Town, with episodes 3 and 4 adapting Syrup Village, episode 5 and 6 adapts the Barati, and episodes 7 and 8 adapt Arlong Park. While the pacing in general isn't bad, it just results in a lot of the side characters that we are familiar with either being cut or not getting anywhere near as much screen time in comparison to what they have within the manga. Additionally, the sequence of how events unfold are switched around so that they can adapt the story into a shorter overall runtime. Now, I have to admit that it is evident that a lot of time and effort has gone into this production, and it really feels like the people behind it love the source material and that they did their best to respect it, which is more than what I can say for the Netflix adaptations of Cowboy Bebop and especially Death Note. I think going into this adaptation, it's important to understand that the Netflix One Piece adaptation is taking certain liberties with the story. In a way, they are telling an abridged version of the One Piece manga. Netflix One Piece sticks to the main beats of the story, but it changes the events around as to how we get to them. Now, in an early video where I was talking about the One Piece live action adaptation, I was really critical of some of the casting choices from having seen just the trailers alone. But now that I have watched all of the show, I'll admit that Buggy and Mihawk were some of my favorite non-Straw Hat characters in this series. And not to mention Helmeppo, I was really impressed by his portrayal in this new adaptation. Episode 1 begins with Monkey D. Garp taking the center stage as he is present during the iconic execution of Goldie Roger. Now, this is the first major difference that fans will notice. We know that Garp wasn't present at Logtown for the execution in either the anime or the manga. Now, this isn't the only change that has happened to his character in this adaptation, as Garp plays more of an active role within this version of One Piece. He is essentially an antagonist who is trying to track down Luffy, with both Kobe and Helmeppo working under him. Similarly to the live action adaptation, the anime had also rearranged the sequence of events and had introduced filler anime scenes in comparison to the manga. Material from the Romance Dawn chapter was included within episode 4 of the anime, and this is in contrast to the live action series where we see the first chapter of the manga that is adapted across the first 2 episodes. This serves as a nice structural reframing of Luffy's past, instead of it being shown to us in one continuous sequence, as we end up revisiting Luffy's backstory via several flashbacks that have been divided over the Romance Dawn and Orange Town episodes. Now, I know that not a lot of people are going to be liking this change, as they would have preferred to see all of Luffy's backstory in one continuous sequence, and I do think that this may have been more impactful, but it's not a massive change in the grand scheme of things, and I can see how it does work with the flashbacks being split across several key moments during episodes 1 and 2. The live action version of One Piece adapts 10 volumes worth of manga material into 8 one-hour-long episodes, which means that a lot of reorganizing and condensing down of story elements as well as aspects of world building have had to take place here. With this being said, there is no shortage of Easter eggs that are scattered throughout this series for massive fans of the series to spot. There are mentions of events relating to characters that appear way later on in the manga continuity, with details relating to them dotted across the episodes. This serves as a fantastic addition for die-hard One Piece fans to sink their teeth into. At the beginning of the One Piece manga, the story is generally episodic, with Luffy hopping from one area to the next and picking up people to join his crew that he has taken a liking to. While the overall order of events unfold within a similar manner in the live action, for some reason I just don't think that it feels the same. The story feels intentionally driven, with Luffy being guided to each encounter rather than him carelessly stumbling upon the future members of the Straw Hat crew. There is a sense that the Netflix version is getting a bit ahead of itself, with several elements from the Grand Line portion of the story being shoehorned into the East Blue saga. I mean, they act as nice bits of foreshadowing, but I wish that this was in addition of focusing on adapting East Blue well, rather than placing these tidbits in, which feels like a priority for the team behind the show. Garp is also introduced a lot earlier on in the story, as well as Baroque works being mentioned within the first 10 minutes of the episode, as we learn that an agent from the organization wants to recruit the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. Now, I understand that Netflix is planting the seeds for season 2, but I really want them to nail season 1 without these distractions. Because of the restructuring of the story, it results in Arlong and his crew being introduced a lot earlier on in the live action in comparison to the manga. manga. He is hinted at towards the end of the second episode, and we then get a proper look at his character within episode 3. Now, the core plot points surrounding Usopp and the Syrup Village section of the story are adapted well in my opinion. I mean, there are some notable changes like Garp persistently trying to hunt down Luffy, with the live action reworking scenes from the manga, while other marine ships may have been pursuing the Straw Hats and replacing them with Garp's ship. Now, following this, the most notable omission from the story as the Straw Hats arrive at the Barati is the omission of Don Creek, which manga readers will know is a pivotal character who sets up the introduction of Mihawk. The live action changes things around by having Mihawk being called by Garp like he is some sort of a hitman, which leads to the clash between Mihawk and Zoro. Arlong then appears not too long after this, and he causes havoc at the Barati, which again is a major change to the story as he clashes with Luffy before leaving for Arlong Park. I think that it's important to highlight the challenges that a live action version of One Piece would have in adapting the unique tone and style of humor that is found within the manga. One Piece's source material has eccentric visuals achieved via Oda's talented art style. This in general is difficult to emulate with human actors, as well as the change in the medium from comic book to live action. Netflix One Piece adapts to tell the story via a slightly darker tone, but it does end up clashing when we see very playful scenes being adapted that are trying to remain faithful to the manga counterpart. It is a difficult act to juggle, and one that I do not envy the writers for at least trying to balance. This is more than what I can say for some other live action anime which didn't even attempt at getting this balance right. My critique is that some moments that are intended to be outrageous or silly, like a character yelling out their attack names or seeing impractical weapons, and some of the CGI, it ends up failing to land the mark within the live action version. I just get the impression that I'm watching cosplayers at an anime convention. I want to spend some time talking about the characters, and there's no better place to begin with than talking about the future king of the pirates, Luffy. Overall, I find him to be a mixed bag, but one that tilts slightly to the more favorable side. With the series intending to be more serious and having less gag comedy or outrageous humor, Luffy is redirected as someone who is more in line with the stereotypical American comic book hero, with some flashes of the original Luffy character shining through. I have to admit that this is credited to the incredible work of Iñaki Godoy, who really does bring Luffy to life with his very believable portrayal. When he screams out, "I'm going to be the king of the pirates," it really does feel like Luffy is saying this. Now, we get a lot of incredible Luffy moments via Iñaki's portrayal, as his character acting really shines through, and I think that it makes up for a lot of the lack of proper dialogue that is given to his character within the script. Now, coming back to this point of him being adapted in a very American comic book style manner, Luffy is portrayed within the story itself as an underdog. Yes, within the original source material, nearly everyone who hears his declaration of becoming the Pirate King laughs at Luffy and calls him a fool. But in the manga, you have this confidence that Luffy is somehow going to make it. Unfortunately, I don't feel the same level of confidence from the Netflix version. Now, I'm going to be elaborating upon this point a bit later on, because, well, to bluntly put it, the live action has actually nerfed Luffy, because we see him struggle against marine grunts as well as Buggy, when contrastingly, he was largely mowing his way through his opposition within the source material. In the manga, Luffy genuinely seems as though he can end most fights within the East Blue Saga with ease. The only reason that his fights are prolonged is because of his whimsical nature. Admittedly, Zoro is easily my favorite character here, with his portrayal really impressing me in terms of both his writing and performance. Makenyu is able to give off a cool presence, and he gets Zoro's iconic body language down to a T. He is pretty much the most common straight man to the antics of his crew, and he plays the role of a straight man without coming off as a stick in the mud. While I wasn't 100% sold on his portrayal of Zoro just by looking at the promotional photos, but now that I've seen Zoro in motion, I have to say that a lot of my concerns have been remedied. Now, unfortunately, Zoro's character doesn't escape the flaws of the restructuring of the story, because he doesn't end up making a deal with Luffy like he does within the manga. Now, this agreement had made us see a different side to Zoro's character, as it had demonstrated his honor and sense of pride to live up to his word. He ended up joining Luffy only after his swords were retrieved for him. Contrastingly, the live action highlights how he has no loyalties or debts to Luffy, which ends up binding him to the Straw Hat crew. But despite the omission of all of this, he still ends up assisting Luffy and Nami later on when they're in a tight spot, so his motives within the live action are not clear. Because of this, it does feel like he's just hanging around with Luffy and he could leave at any time. When he ends up being separated from Luffy while battling against Buggy's crew, the line that he delivers stating that he doesn't need to believe in Luffy because he believes in himself, it doesn't evoke anywhere near as enough of the feelings that I would feel reading this in the manga counterpart. This This is because their relationship hasn't been clearly defined from Zoro's perspective, so we don't really know if he actually respects Luffy, because his motive for joining the crew isn't as well defined as it is within the manga. Unfortunately, out of all of the Straw Hats, the character portrayal of Nami suffers the most in the live action medium. On paper, they have her characteristics down, like her being a thief and using her wit and cunning to get in and out of tense situations. Now, despite this, there is a marked difference in her overall demeanor. In the Netflix adaptation, she's more dour, snarky, and portrayed as much more selfish than her manga counterpart, and in general, it feels like she is less fun to be around. In the manga counterpart, there is a certain charisma imbued within her, and her ability to blend in with the wackiness around her adds to Nami's charm. I think that the blame for some of these issues has to go towards the scripting and the direction, as it doesn't enable the actress Emily Rudd to emote anywhere near as much as she should be able to. I mean, even her introduction into the story is just screaming aggressive indifference. Yes, in both versions, Nami has a front that she's putting on in order to deal with her circumstances, though in the live action they have her characterized as a dour pessimist, and they end up making it clash against Luffy's optimism just for its own sake. Now, this doesn't help her when she travels with Luffy, because similarly to Zoro, there isn't a moment where a positive attribute of Luffy is shown to either of them, which endears him to them respectively. Within the manga, this was actually a pivotal thing that needed to be established in order to form the foundation of their bond, as they begin to travel together as a crew. Now, this was hinted to us within the trailers, with both Nami and Zoro stating that they are not a crew, and now that I have seen the live action version, I believe in their defiance, albeit it is uncharacteristic and different to what I am used to. I just wish that they had taken a bit more time to delve into the motives of both Zoro and Nami. Yes, Nami was using Luffy and his fledgling crew for her own personal benefit in the manga, but there's a certain level of heart that she begins to feel after her time with the Straw Hats, as well as guilt that she feels for betraying them, and this is something that the live action struggles to convey. It fails to highlight her conflicting emotions in this moment, because she has never really felt this way before, despite having tricked and robbed countless pirates over the years. Live action Usopp is relatively in the clear here, with Jacob Gibson's portrayal of his character having a lot of heart. He comes off positively with his likable charm combined with an appropriate amount of goofy attitude. Usopp's tall tales, his marksmanship, and most importantly his initial cowardice are conveyed excellently, which is why it is so satisfactory when we see him overcome his flaws through finding the courage to stand up against the devious Captain Kuro. Sanji similarly comes off unscathed, although the 27-year-old actor Taz Skylar who is portraying him doesn't quite fit the age range of 19 that he is supposed to be playing. He does, however, pull off wearing a suit quite well, so that helps to make up for some things. He isn't as bombastic as his manga counterpart, especially when it comes to his escapades in love, but considering how things have turned out for other characters who have really exaggerated their portrayals, I think that this may have been for the better. Thankfully, they had made sure to keep another more key aspect of Sanji's character, which is his integrity, and not letting a single man go hungry no matter what. I think that this is far more important to nail in comparison to the gag aspects of Sanji's character. His dynamic with Zeph, his father figure, is portrayed well for the most part. We see them hurl insults at each other, but despite this, you feel that they still care for one another, so you're not left thinking that they actually dislike each other. The only problem that I do have with his character is the circumstances behind him deciding to set sail with the Straw Hats. Zeph still wants Sanji to pursue his dream of finding the All Blue, the mythical location where all four oceans converge, but the way that it is done isn't like the uplifting manner in which the manga had conveyed, where we see Sanji express his gratitude to both Zeph and the staff of the Bharati. Instead, within the live action, it's like Zeph is doing this for Sanji's own good. Zeph has to essentially kick him out of the Bharati as they end up leaving things off on a tiff. I don't think that either of them truly had seen this as a lasting squabble in universe, but it leaves a less than desirable taste in my mouth all the same. The impact of this moment in particular is undeniable within the manga and the anime. The live action adaptation really falls flat in comparison. Also, Sanji witnessing the battle between Mihawk and Zoro was pivotal in him gaining the courage to set out for his own dream, after he sees Zoro risk his own life for the sake of his dream of becoming the strongest swordsman. The same motive and impactful realization from Sanji is just not present within the Netflix version, which makes me question his reasoning for joining Luffy. I guess this is one of the reasons why I'm so skeptical for any and all live action adaptations. I mean, what's the point of going through all of this effort if they're going to just add nothing of substance to the source material? I do understand that they're trying to adapt it to a new medium that caters to a wider audience, but but it's a shame if the wider audience aren't going to be able to relive some of the most greatest moments that had made One Piece such an amazing series to begin with. So let's now spend some time talking about Buggy's character, as he appears within the second episode. While on paper he does cause terror to the town he's in, the way that it is showcased within the live action version is completely different. In addition to this, his attitude is also altered in comparison to the manga. Within the source material, Buggy terrorizes the town that he is in by making the citizens fear for their lives, but his manner of doing so is radically changed within the live action version. In the Netflix version, he has an entire circus that is built, with the citizens being chained to their seats and forced to watch him do stand-up comedy. There is also a laugh now sign present. Now I won't lie, there are certain aspects of his adaptation that make me think that he is a Wish.com version of the Joker, because I guess both of them are clowns and there is only one way to write a villainous clown. The live action also gives Buggy a chip on his shoulder, with him having abandonment issues which he seeks to impose onto Luffy, as he states that they are all freaks and losers with unattainable dreams, which I think really falls flat in terms of his character. He still knows Shanks in this version, but it's only a verbal recognition rather than seeing the flashback to their time serving on the same crew and his hilariously petty reason for hating Shanks. Buggy is made to be a semi-reoccurring character, but it's not so that he can get revenge on Luffy. Instead, Arlong takes his literal head so that Buggy can lead him to Luffy. Afterwards, he's again used as a hostage guide by the Straw Hats. Let's now turn our attention towards the major antagonist and villains of the series. Now, one of the most disappointing aspects of the Netflix version is that Garp suffers from the in-name only syndrome, as he's largely unrecognizable from his manga counterpart. There isn't the immediately likable charm and boisterous eccentricism that Garp is characteristically known for. The live action doesn't showcase much that would make you believe that he and Luffy are family. The Garp that we know has been established to have an allegiance with the Marines, but he has always been the type of character to march to the beat of his own drum, which fits the nature of those with the letter D in their name, belonging to the iconic D clan known for their rebellious, anti-authoritarian behavior. The manga counterpart of Garp demonstrates genuine care for Luffy and his crewmates, with him having a tough but fair approach towards him, establishing Garp as a kind-natured individual. In this adaptation, however, he's a stuffy, uptight Scotsman, doggedly following the party line of the Marines. Now, via several flashbacks, the manga establishes that Garp cares for Luffy, despite their over-the-top disagreements. Live-action Garp, on the other hand, comes off as much more abusive, and honestly, it's a little hard to watch. Rather than a fist of love, easy to talk to Garp, it feels like Netflix Garp is a moment away from breaking Luffy's neck. Additionally, towards the end of the series, we find out that Garp was only pursuing Luffy as somewhat of a test so that he is strong enough as a pirate for the upcoming adventures he's about to go on. Now, the Garp that we know about detests pirates, and he refuses to accept that Luffy wants to become a pirate or is a pirate, so I don't think that he would have ever tested him in this way within the manga. So I'm going to group together the last few characters worth mentioning here, starting with Shanks. So from a writing perspective, he is depicted very well from his appearances from the very first manga chapter, as well as his brief meeting with Mihawk towards the end of the series. However, I don't think that the actor portraying him gives the same level of presence or swagger that Shanks is supposed to effortlessly exude. He isn't bad, don't get me wrong, it's just that his character ends up feeling flat, like there isn't enough being done to make him stand out like in an iconic manner. The same sentiment can be expressed for the character of Mihawk, with him looking like the character, however his role within the story is lackluster, with him feeling more like Garp's hitman in comparison to the insane premise of the manga, which depicts him as this very intimidating individual who holds the title of the world's greatest swordsman, who ends up destroying Don Creek's flagship because he had just wanted to kill some time. Don Creek's character for the most part was omitted from the Netflix version, so instead Mihawk is called by Garp to go to the Bharati, with him having a toned down entrance with no massive spectacle announcing his arrival. It was admittedly random in the manga when Don Creek's ship was suddenly destroyed, but it had helped to convey a sense of danger to the Grand Line, which is dubbed as the Pirate's Graveyard. And at the same time, we are introduced to Mihawk, an individual who is willing to hunt down a fleet just because he was bored. The live action version does a fantastic job of showcasing the confidence within Mihawk's movements during his battle against Zoro, which he faithfully takes part in with a pocket knife. Kobe and Helmeppo are also made to be recurring characters along with Garp, and there are scenes involving them in every episode. I have to say that Helmeppo was portrayed excellently here. The actor playing him, Aidan Scott, did an excellent job of conveying his personality to us. We see Kobe questioning his worldview on the Marines, which he describes to be just, and pirates that he describes as evil, as well as the student-teacher dynamic that they share with Vice Admiral Garp. The live-action version also shows Helmeppo being humbled and gaining a sense of respect for Kobe over the course of the story. Now, I suppose I've saved the best for last, as it's time to talk about Arlong. He was one of the most controversial aspects of this live action when fans had first seen him revealed within the trailers. Arlong was brought up in the beginning, and then they had kind of left him around until the ending two-parter. Despite showing up in the flesh so early on, he isn't really the final villain for the season, as he's taken out halfway through the last episode. His story with Nami, where he takes over her town and makes a deal with her that he has no intention to honor, is kept faithful for the most part, but unfortunately the Netflix adaptation doesn't convey the same sense of villainous intimidation that you feel from the source material. While the manga counterpart did reveal that Arlong in the end was just a bully who couldn't make it in the Grand Line and he had acted like a big fish in a small pond, there still was this sense of threat and danger from Arlong. But contrastingly, the live action version doesn't have this same level of tension, and you don't really feel this concern for Luffy and the crew. So in the end, the Arlong Park section isn't as engaging as it was within the anime or the manga. I want to now take some time talking about the practical and visual aspects of this production. Cutting to the chase, like I had spoken about in my reaction to the trailers for this live action, the yellow filter that they have applied is not doing this series any favors. One Piece is known for its bright and colorful aesthetic, which is even expressed to readers of the manga who experience the story in black and white. The yellow Mexican filter makes me feel like we're back to the late 2000s, where everything had to have this washed out blue or orange filter over it. I do appreciate that this may have been done in part due to the lighting of specific scenes, or rather lack of proper lighting, as there are certain times when the filter isn't used, such as Garp's ship, but as a result the light washes out color as if there was a problem in the white balance. Contrast this with night shots, to which there are plenty of them within the series, and I'll explain why in a second, but it's evident that the cinematographer and the staff working on the series are noticeably more in their element during these dimly lit scenes. For a show where the sea is featured prominently, you would think that the obvious decision would be to have the eye-catching blue of the water take center stage, but that option is forsaken. The exception to this is when we are shown Sanji's backstory with Zeph, where the tint is noticeably off and we can actually see the ocean waters and clouds as they were meant to be seen. But this was unfortunately a fleeting experience, because we cut straight back to the Mexican filters in no time at all. I mean, there were several scenes that were supposed to have been taking place within broad daylight, in the morning, or even in the early afternoon, which have been shifted to the evening or night. Now, this has obviously been done in order to sell the CGI shots by covering up their flaws and making them look more believable via the dim lighting. Various devil fruit powers, such as Luffy's rubber body or Buggy's segmented body, are often showcased at night or in dark settings. It helps in hiding the flaws in the visual effects, which are used to display the devil fruit abilities. Now, having scenes take place constantly in dimly lit environments can get tiring, especially when we are used to specific key events that take place within the daylight in the manga or in the anime. Typically, this is a common practice that is done when you're running things on a tight budget, but this technique negatively impacts the well-established bright and vibrant tone of One Piece. Now, when you're adapting a shonen battle manga, you need to land the fight scenes, and thankfully we have a huge step up from the awkwardly choreographed and edited fights from the Netflix live-action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop. We can view the fight scenes from two perspectives. Firstly, via the traditional practical fights like those involving Zoro's swordsmanship, which I think are done really well. The camera work in general is above average in its maneuvering, shot composition is well managed, and there aren't too many jarring cuts and abrupt edits. The only exception to this is when they add in elements that defy the laws of physics, like when someone is sent flying back yards from a single strike, for example. There are certain moments when the wire work does take you out of the action, but overall I don't think that it's anything too offensive. Now, other action sequences featuring fist fights do end up meeting their mark, as it helps that most of the Marine grunts didn't have a particular fighting style, so there wasn't this over-reliance on wire work, and we just had simple practical action sequences, which was nice to see. Now it's time to talk about the second type of fight within this series. Whenever we see fights that involve the use of devil fruit powers, the most notable being Luffy's devil fruit abilities, this is where a lot of the action sequences end up falling flat. Because of the budget, Luffy isn't allowed to be as creative or broad with his attacks as he is within the source material. Luffy's attacks lack the feeling of space when being pushed out and reeled in for a strike. The kinetic energy that should be on display is not felt on screen, and consequently this is what results in my biggest issue with the live action series, which is Luffy's lack of fighting skill. Netflix has literally nerfed him in this version. I briefly spoke about this earlier in the video, but Netflix Luffy struggles a lot against opponents that his manga counterpart wouldn't break a sweat against. Even accounting for the limitations in CGI that nerf his devil fruit, when we compare Luffy to Zoro and Sanji, he doesn't do enough in the Netflix version to distinguish himself as part of the monster trio. It's possible that they were concerned about making Luffy too powerful like in the manga, and they had wanted to give him more of a challenge during these early sections of the story, but I think that they had dialed back his powers a bit too much. As previously mentioned, integrating the special effects within the series is where you have the most trouble. Unfortunately, the natural, second-natured use of Luffy's rubber body for attacking, deflecting, or even comedy isn't transferred over to the Netflix version. To be frank, some of the special effects with Luffy look worse than the Fantastic Four movie of the 2000s, despite it being over 15 years old now. Additionally, there are very few actual scenes within this show that showcase wounds or blood loss, and I'm not kidding, they are practically non-existent here. Even in comparison to the anime, which toned down the violence, there is barely any within the live action version. Now don't get me wrong, there are specific moments where blood is showcased, it's just that it's nowhere near as much as the manga or the anime. This adaptation could very well have been shown on a Saturday morning kids block without much of a fuss, I think. The most notable injury in the series is Mihawk attacking Zoro, which was supposed to be another iconic moment which ended up feeling flat. The show has some lines of dialogue stating that he had lost a lot of blood, but we had never explicitly shown it. So after having watched all 8 episodes and analyzing and breaking down several aspects that I had liked and disliked, the best way that I can describe this offering to both the One Piece franchise and live action anime adaptations as a whole would be as serviceable. It is one of the better live action anime adaptations, but this isn't very difficult to achieve, with the bar having been set so low. I mean, this isn't a complete failure like Dragon Ball Evolution, which I'd feared and semi-expected it to be after watching the trailers. However, it does fail to prove to me as to why One Piece needed to be adapted into a new medium, because the live action version doesn't really add anything of substance to the characters or the story. Instead, it tells a mediocre, fast-paced, rehashed version of the story which lacks the appeal of the original. Additionally, it omits a lot of the charm that Oda painstakingly writes into his characters. As a result, they end up feeling flat and uninspired within the live action version. Considering the amount of money that was invested into this project, only time will tell if Netflix deems it to be financially viable enough for a second season. Personally, I wouldn't hold my breath on it. Now give me a bit more of your time, as I'd like to address the elephant in the room, which is the discourse surrounding this live action series, or rather the lack of healthy discourse in regards to this adaptation on social media, both leading up to and after its release. Anytime a popular, well-established franchise goes through any kind of adaptation, retelling, or a new direction, it's perfectly natural for fans to be anxious, apprehensive, and defensive for the story that they have grown attached to. This anxiousness can lead to people jumping to rash conclusions, like I admittedly did during my initial video covering the One Piece live action trailer. After having read the comments under that video and seeing similar sentiments shared across Twitter about this adaptation, it is apparent that there is an aggressive push for positive-only opinions to be shared about the series. Anyone saying anything remotely critical is immediately shut down and branded as a One Piece hater. I've seen posts passionately praising the series to high heaven, deeming it to be a perfect adaptation without a single flaw, and coming down hard on people who critique it in the slightest, even if the vast majority of their review is positive. I honestly think that this type of mindset is bordering on cult-like, because Netflix, Oda, or Iñaki Godoy aren't paying you to attack anyone who has a different opinion to you. I cited several things that I had liked about this adaptation and genuine areas where I think that it falls flat. I've seen even the most lukewarm of takes, such as the lighting could have been better, elicit insane amounts of backlash. This blind worshipping of art is only going to negatively impact it in the long run and stop it from thriving and constantly improving. If there is a season 2, I want them to learn from the mistakes from season 1, but to do that we need to have a healthy discourse where you can critique the flaws without having your head bitten off by the cult of Netflix. Being able to read and comprehend differing opinions is a vital skill to have. Instead, some people prefer to throw a tantrum and to argue until they are blue in the face about why you're insane for not enjoying something that they have enjoyed. They don't even care to listen to or answer any of your plausible critiques, they instead resort to name calling. If you genuinely are foaming at the mouth mouth during my critiques of this live action adaptation, then I challenge you to channel your frustrations into a coherent argument against my takes. This is what results in healthy discourse, not calling someone a hater because they made a valid argument that you're struggling to counter. So this is everything that I have to say about Netflix's One Piece for now, and honestly I'd like to think that I've given it a fair shot. In comparison to the other Netflix live action adaptations, it is certainly a step in the right direction, and it was more watchable than Cowboy Bebop and Death Note. However, if you're a fan of One Piece and you intimately know the story, then I think it's fair to say that some of the restructuring of the story is jarring and hard to get your head around. I hope that this doesn't affect newcomers to the story, as I am sure that many people who would have otherwise never checked out One Piece will be watching this adaptation, and it's a great way to be introduced to the One Piece world. Now, hopefully nobody can say that I'm judging all of this series based on a 3-minute trailer and not giving the live action adaptation a fair chance, because I have actually sat through all 8 episodes and rewatched specific moments several times in order to write this review. I want to now know all of your thoughts. What did you think about this adaptation of One Piece? Did you agree with the aspects of the show that I liked and disliked? I look forward to reading all of your comments, and if you enjoyed this review, then definitely subscribe to my dedicated One Piece YouTube channel called Kaizuku King, where I cover all of the latest goings on within the manga. Lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.